Welcome back to Lambda School's Intro to Web Development. In this video, we are going to continue talking about control flow. So in the last video, we introduced a couple of new concepts. First and foremost is control flow. It's the ability for us to tell the computer to run some code if a statement is true. We do that using if statements. We also learned about comparison operators. So comparison operators will compare two sides, essentially an evaluation, and return either true or false for that. We're going to get a little deeper into some other operators in this lesson and a little deeper into control flow. So in the last lesson we talked about comparison operators, the greater than, less than, is equal to, is not equal to. This lesson we're going to talk about logical operators. Logical operators are a little bit different, where comparison operators return a true or a false while comparing two items. A logical operator is going to compare a true and a false and return something based on that. So the first logical operator we're going to talk about in this lesson is the AND symbol. So the AND symbol is going to take two evaluations, one on the left, one on the right side, and if both of those evaluations evaluate to true, then the AND will return a true. Only if both sides evaluate to true. Otherwise, if one or both evaluate to false, then the AND will evaluate to false. So let's see what that looks like in this case. We're going to write a very simple AND. We're going to say on the left side is true, and, so two ampersands, and we'll say the right side is true. So in this case, if both sides are true, then the AND will return a true. Let's see what happens. And we see that it has returned a true. Let's see what happens if one side is false. Then AND will return a false. If both sides are false, then AND will definitely return false, right? So both sides need to be true in order for AND to return true. Let's write this with something a little bit more complex. Let's say 100 is greater than 10, and we'll say 7 equals 7. So it's going to evaluate the left side, and that's going to be true. And then it'll evaluate the right side, and if that's also true, then AND will return true. And there we go, we've got a true. Now what if I say 7 is greater than 7? Well, that means one of the sides is false, and AND will return false. The next operator we're going to talk about is the OR operator. And the OR operator is denoted by two vertical lines. These aren't ones, they're not lowercase l's or uppercase i's, they're actually a vertical line. And so if you look on your keyboard right above the return key, you should see the backslash with the vertical line. So press shift and that key and you'll get one, press it 2 times and you'll get both of them. So the OR is just like the AND, except the OR will return true if either side is true. Only one side needs to be true with an OR. So if one side is true, it'll be true. If both sides are true, it'll still be true. If both sides are false, then the OR will be false. So let's take a look at the OR now. Let's go true or true, right? So remember, only one side needs to be true with the OR operator. We'll run it and we'll see we get true. Okay, what if I say true and or false? We're still going to get true because only one side needs to be true. If both sides are false, then we'll get false. But if either of the sides are true, we'll still get true. So let's go back to our statement here. We're going to replace the AND with an OR. And now let's look at what our statement is. The logical operator will evaluate the left side, which 100 greater than 10, that is true. So in this point, if one side is true, then it will automatically return true without evaluating, because only one side needs to be true, right? So if the left side is true, then it's just going to return true. But let's look at the right side. 7 greater than 7. Well, that's false, but it doesn't matter because one side is true. So we're going to get a true out of it. Now let's go. Both sides are false. So 100 is definitely not less than 10, and 7 is definitely not greater than 7. So both sides are false, and the OR is going to give us a false. Once again, if both sides are true, we get a true. And if only one side is true, in this case the right side is true, we still get a true. Finally, the last logical operator we're going to talk about is a little bit different. It's called the not operator. And we've seen this one before when we did the equals or not equals. So the not operator is going to return the opposite of whatever the statement evaluates to. It doesn't go in between two statements. It wraps a statement and it says, whatever this evaluates to, give me the opposite of it. So let's look at that now. So if I said true, we would expect true to appear on the screen, right? But if I said not true, then the opposite of what this is going to turn out to be is going to come up, and we get false. So what if I say 100 equals 10? We're going to get false, but I can also wrap this in parentheses and say, give me the opposite of that. And now we get true. So you can see how things can start to get a little tricky depending on how you use the not operator and how you use your and or symbols. All right, now that we've got logical operators out of the way, let's talk about control flow again. We remember that control flow allows us to evaluate an expression, or a statement in this case, and if that expression or statement evaluates to true, then it will run code between the brackets. Well, sometimes we want to evaluate an expression multiple times. We want to say, if something is this way, then run this code. If it's this way, run this code. If it's this way, etc. It can be more than one thing. In this case, we're going to introduce else ifs, or else statements. So an else statement allows us to default. So if the if statement isn't true, we still want to run some code. So we run an else statement. All right, so here's our if statement again. We have our if, and we have in our parentheses, we'll return an expression for us. Let's go ahead and put an expression in here. Let's use one of our logical operators. We're going to say if 100 equals 100 and 1 is greater than 0. So if this turns out to be true, this entire thing turns out to be true, then let's run this code. We'll just console log statement is true. Let's run it. There we go, statement is true. Now let's say, since this is an and, both sides need to be true. So why don't we say 100 is equal to 101 and 1 is greater than 0. In this case, this side is false. If it's false, then both sides have to be true and this and will return false. So what we could do currently, we get nothing that appears on the screen, but we want to have a statement that says statement is false. In this case, we can use our default, aka our else statement. So this will run if nothing else on there is true. We'll actually see multiple if statements in just a moment, but let's console log this. Statement is false. All right, let's run it. And now we get our else statement. Statement is false. Let's do this with a couple more. My name is Dan. Oh, let's say Dan equals, let's say lowercase Dan, right? Remember, we said that triple equals is going to make sure that they are the identical thing, right? So Dan is not equal to lowercase Dan. So let's say statement is false. Now let's go the not symbol. So not equals. So it's now saying this is going to return true if these two are not equal to each other. And now we get it. Statement is true. Once more, we can do something like this to make things. Let's get rid of this Dan equals Dan. And let's say if 1 is greater than 0. So let's break this down. First, it's going to evaluate 1 greater than 0. This is obviously true, so this will be true, but the not statement here says give us the opposite. In this case, this whole statement is going to be false. If this whole statement is false, then nothing in here is going to run, and it'll go to our else statement. And there we go, statement is false. Let's flip that sign, say that 1 is less than 0, so that's false, and this is going to give us the opposite, remember, so this whole thing will be true, and that first console log should run. There we go. So this is how we work an else statement. If we want something in there that's just going to run if nothing else is true. All right, so what if we want to test an evaluation against multiple if statements of the same nature? We can do that using an else if statement. So it falls right in line with our initial if statement. Run some code, else if, and then we're going to ask it to evaluate another statement. Run that code. Otherwise, if both of those are false, then we have our else as a backup. One important thing to note here is that only one of these blocks of code is going to run. Only one. So if the first one is true, then it'll run and nothing else will be run. Otherwise, it'll keep following down the line until it gets to the else. And then if nothing is true, then else will run. All right, let's make another example here. We're going to say var age equals 16. All right. And in this case, we're going to write an if statement. Check if user is old enough to drive. We're going to check to see if a user is old enough to drive. In our made-up state here, you have to be 16 to drive, 15 to have a learner's permit. So let's do a little something in here. Let's do the first one to see if they're old enough to drive. So we're going to say age greater than or equal to 16. So if the age is greater than or equal to 16, then we know that the person is old enough to drive. And then let's say console.log, wait a few more years. If they're not old enough to drive, we're going to say wait a few more years. All right, let's check it out. We have age. Age is 16. We're going to say 16 greater than or equal to 16. Well, yeah, they're equal, so this is going to turn true, and we should get a console log person is old enough to drive. And there we go. Person is old enough to drive. Let's say the user is 15. And in our state, 15-year-olds are allowed to get their learner's permits. So let's add an else if statement. So if this is not true, then it'll fall down to the else if, and we'll say age equals 15. And in this case, we're going to say console log person can get their learner's permit. All right, so let's follow the progression here. The first if is going to run, and it's going to say age, which is 15, greater than or equal to 16. Well, this is false. So this block will not run. Then, if it doesn't run, we're going to come down to the else if. If age equals 15, which that's true, then this block will run. Remember, only one of these blocks will run in an if statement. So in this case, this else block will not run either. Let's see if it works. Person can get their learner's permit. Great, it's working. Let's test it out and say 14. And now we've got wait a few more years because age is not older than or greater or equal to 16. Age is not equal to 15. That means that they must be under 15 and they need to wait a couple more years. And we can try it out with as many as we want. 20 years old. Person is old enough to drive. 17. Old enough to drive. 8. Needs to wait a few more years. Great, so we've got some control flow working for us now. One thing I do want to point out is many students ask, why don't we just write a bunch of if statements? Why do we keep writing all these else statements? Well, let's check it out. If we had if statements, many of them, well, what if we had something like this, where we have a greater than or equal to 16, greater than 15, and an else if, this would obviously, we could do greater than or equal to 15. This would obviously not run if there were 16 or above, but in a 3 different if statements, we'll get multiple readouts, and we only wanted one readout. So that's what's great for about if and else if statements, is that we'll only get one readout with an else if, because if one is true, then it skips the rest.